Chris Olave has proven in short time that he is a very good wide receiver and one of the best players for the New Orleans Saints. But does he have what it takes to go from a really good playmaker to one of the best wide receivers in football? That's going to be one of the biggest questions, not just for the Saints, but for Chris Olave, because 2024 could be a make or break year for how big this player can get in New Orleans.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosvoglu, and as always, we're brought to you by Boot Crew Media. Make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page, and if you haven't and you do like the content, make sure to smash the like button, helps out, and also hit the notification bell so you get alerted for new content like this for the Saints, and of course, Pelicans work, because I think Boot Crew does have the best Pelicans content in the business. I don't really think it's close, to be honest. What they're putting out is just exceptional. So, I started talking about Chris Olave. Let's get into it. Chris Olave is approaching year 3 in New Orleans. And this is not going to be, before anyone gets worried about whether or not this is going to be a hot take rant or any of those type of things, I think Chris Olave is a very good football player. And I think Chris Olave has already established himself as a reliable wide receiver who's going to get you a minimum of 1,000 yards per season. I think he's done that already. He's earned that respect. There's no way for me to just go in a different direction and say that. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is as he gets ready for year 3, what are fair expectations for Chris Olave? And what should we expect from him if we think he's going to take that next step? Because I think when you are a good young player like Chris Olave, there's no reason to be satisfied with what you put out. You should try to strive for greatness. And Chris Olave has been open about that. Chris Olave was on NFL Network earlier this offseason, and he talked about wanting to be great. And I'll read what he said. He said, just going into this offseason, knowing that the Saints believe in me as the number one receiver, I'm excited to get to work. But I'm just trying to take that next step forward and try to go from a good player to an elite player. So I'm trying to be consistent every day and put in the work to be one of the top receivers in the game. Look, first off, that's the right thing to say, obviously. But he does have a point. The Saints have really kind of cleaned the path. They've carved that path for him to be the number one guy unquestioned, which he was kind of last year from a talent perspective, but obviously you still have the shadow of Michael Thomas that's in the room. That isn't the case anymore for Olave. So let's just go off the numbers, and then we'll get into what I think he can do in year 3 and what I think are fair expectations for him in year 3. So first year, rookie year, 72 catches, 1,042 yards, and 4 touchdowns. He missed 2 games. His quarterbacks were Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. Year 2, 87 receptions, so 15 more catches, a little over 1,100 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He missed 1 game. So everything went up for Olave, which is good, but it didn't take a huge jump. It was kind of a minimal jump in terms of overall production, and that was with Derek Carr as his quarterback, obviously. And, there were moments where they were on the right page and it looked great, and there were moments where, man, you look like and thought maybe they'd want to kill each other. Like that. That's how it felt sometimes. So going into year 3, the question isn't, is it a prove it year for him to be a good player? It's a prove it year to be a great player. And right now, I think Chris Olave, and I think this is a fair assessment to say, he's put himself in that class of where I think he can be Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith production-wise. They're not all the same players. They're all kind of different. Although Devontae and Olave kind of have, when it's not the strongest of frames and they're good route runners, but they're not going to take the biggest of hits. But they're really good wide receivers. Like the production's going to be there and you're going to get paid handsomely because of it. But year 3 is usually where you get a good indication of how good and how high is your ceiling. And I'm not expecting Olave to be Jamar Chase or CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson. And he doesn't have to be that, by the way. But I want to see if he can take that leap where you go, man, he is a superstar. Because right now, if you think he's a superstar, I think you're kind of going off what you're hoping and expecting from him. You're not going off what you've been shown. And again, I think Olave is a really good football player, but he has not yet shown he's a superstar. And in order to show that, your numbers got to take a drastic leap. So when I look at sports books right now, a lot of them have his over-under for receiving yards either set around just under 1,100, and a couple of sports books I've seen at just over 1,100. But they're all in that range. And me personally, I think if Olave has like another 1,100-yard season, I'm not going to say that's a disappointment, but to some degree, it'll feel like, all right, well, maybe he's just not a great player. He's a really good one. He's just not a great one. And again, that might be fine. Really good gets you paid. Really good gets you numbers. But I think Olave can be better. And I wouldn't be making this video and talking about it if I didn't feel like Chris Olave can genuinely take that next step, because the route running is there. I think the ability to make some of the most ridiculous catches in the world are there. I mean, there were about 5 last year that Olave made that just had me absolutely floored. So I think he can be really good. But for him, and again, I'm not going to go off sports books. I want to see Olave hit 1,300 yards. And I know it seems like a really specific number, but the reason I'm saying that is I want to see drastic improvement. Because if I see a guy go from 1,000 to 1,100 to 1,300, and you see those incremental increases all the time, I think that's a great sign for this type of player who, again, is only going to get better. And I understand that, but there's so much talk about, how good he is or how good he can be. I just want action. And I think that he can do that. And that for me is going to be a determining factor. So what does Olave need in order to hit those ceilings, to hit that expectation that I set for him? I think the first thing is more consistency. I went back and I looked at his season. So he had 5 games with over 100 yards, which is pretty good. But he had 6 with under 50. And in those 6, there were some where he really just didn't record anything. And now you can blame the offensive coordinator, you can blame the quarterback, you can blame whoever you want. It's still there. So when I got 5 great games and 6 not so great games, let's try to find a happy medium. And if you can do that, more power to you. And better numbers, more money in the end. So consistency, that's number 1 for Olave. Number 2, this actually is not something he can control, but luckily for him, it's been changed. He needs a play caller that prioritizes getting playmakers the ball in their hands. And I said this about Pete Carmichael the last couple of years, and I try to teeter the fence of being funny, but also being dead serious because I meant that shit. Pete Carmichael kind of coached games like, all right, let's just go with the flow. And that's not how you operate in the NFL. You need to have intent behind everything you call as a play caller. And I don't know if Clint Kubiak's system is going to work out. I can't sit here today and promise you guys that it's going to work out, although I really hope it does, obviously. But I can't promise you guys that. But I think if Chris Olave is the number 1 guy in the system, which he is, and Clint Kubiak feels like he can build around him, which I imagine there is that belief, you best believe there's going to be play calls where you feel like it's dialed for number 12. And I'm going to make sure number 12 has the best possible matchup for him. And that's important. And I also think, and again, we'll see what happens in September, but I thought there's times where there were opportunities to make Chris Olave a mismatch for the Saints, and they just didn't do it. Whether it's getting him in the backfield, whether it's getting him matched up in space. Motion would really help a guy like him too, just to kind of see what the matchup is there, and then your quarterback can get a better read as to where he's going to go with the football. But no, we didn't do that with Pete Carmichael. That wasn't a thing for the Saints. It should be with Kubiak. I think that's going to help him. And number 3, and this does fall on Chris Olave just as much as it falls on the other person. You got to be on the same page with Derek Carr. That Jacksonville game, Thursday night, Derek Carr throwing the football pretty much to the 10th row and then blaming Chris Olave for stopping on his route. Both of them can be wrong. Olave can be wrong for not running his routes at full speed, which he didn't do in that game. And Derek Carr could be wrong for complaining when, buddy, you threw the football into the fucking stands. I mean, he's not catching that regardless of how well he ran that route. So they both got to be on the same page. And that's why I'm not going to pick a side. This is not an Olave versus Derek Carr thing. That's not my intent at all for this video. It's about how can Olave go from good to great. And if he wants to go from good to great, got to be on the same page with your quarterback. Because you are not going to find a receiver in this league today, and I'm only saying today because we've seen it in the past, that is going to dominate without being on the same page as their quarterback. And the reason I say now is because I'm thinking 6-7 years ago, DeAndre Hopkins could be put on, Houston with God knows who at quarterback, and the guy was producing. So you need to be on the same page with your quarterback. And we've seen when you're on the same page with your quarterback, you can take those huge leaps. Like, think of where we were as football fans a year ago of how we viewed a guy like Nico Collins and then how we view him now because him and CJ Stroud were on the same page, and boy, did that chemistry blossom. Now, I know I'm going to Chris, Derek Carr is not CJ Stroud. I get that. I totally get that. But you probably view Olave in a way better light than you did Nico Collins last year. So get on the same page with your quarterback, and the rest I think will come. And I think that's going to be important for the Saints. So fair expectations, are probably what the sports books have because they're usually pretty accurate. But for me, and what are my expectations for Chris Olave? I want to see him get 1,300 yards or more. I want to see him do that. And if he can, he's going to get paid well. And the Saints are going to feel like, man, we do have a playmaker that continues to ascend. If not, this isn't a knock on him. I think he can make a fine career of getting 1,100 yards for multiple seasons. Like, there is a market for that, and that is a skill. Like, this isn't a knock on Chris Olave, but I do think there is another gear to him, and I'm hoping he unlocks it this season, and we'll see if he does just that. So let me know your thoughts, guys, in the comment section below. Do you think 1,300 yards is too much to ask for Chris Olave? Do you feel like it's a fair expectation? And what's your expectation for number 12 as he enters his third season in New Orleans? It's going to be interesting, because if they're going to be a team that overachieves and has any excitement on offense, I think a lot of it is going to generate around him and what he can do at the wide receiver spot. So let me know in the comment section below, and I'll make sure to get back to you. As always, guys, make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media on YouTube. If you liked this video, you want more expectations, more interviews, whatever, let us know, and we'll get more content out in the future on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for